And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon. It's the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
John, you're well aware that Gavin Newsom has a podcast, but have you ever asked yourself the question, who exactly is advertising on Gavin Newsom's podcast? Well, as somebody that listens to every show for show prep material, I can tell you. Let's go to break, Gavin.
Go on. Get a little out there. Into the big heart of Nevada.
Wait, the state of Nevada bought ad time?
TravelNevada.com is advertising on Gavin Newsom's podcast.
I wonder if we can get him to spend some money over here.
Let's see who else is advertising on Gavin Newsom's podcast.
There's an FDA-approved pill to boost women's libido. It's called Addie.
Whoa. Well, it is radio. And by the way, we would play that ad on this radio program, too. All right. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is the former mayor of the city of San Francisco and former speaker of the California State Assembly, Willie Brown. Mayor Brown, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted, and I love your collection of items that are apparently paying Newsom broadcast.
Yeah, they are. Big advertising over there. Now, before we get started, I have to tell you that you gave one of the best toasts I've ever seen in person before at our mutual friend Carla Marinucci's retirement party, where you told the Latrell Sprewell story of you, Latrell, and Carla, and I love that story so much.
Yeah, that was she was quite a person covering me in those days, and I always felt I needed help. So it was a good time, yes.
Oh, yeah, you told what was essentially a joke, and it made national news and went all over the place.
Yes. I made the mistake, frankly, of saying that, at some point, he may need it choking. That is the coach.
PJ
and
Carlos.
in those days, you can't say that.
Oh, you even made the lead on ESPN.
That's what I heard. Somebody told me that I obviously have been advertising Willie Brown.
That's
Maybe
right.
I should do a podcast and see what kind of people would sponsor my operation.
Well, Mr. Mayor, when you were mayor of San Francisco, there was kind of a group of mayors at that time, not just you in San Francisco, Dick Reardon in L.A., Daley in Chicago, Giuliani in New York. And it seemed like a time back then that big cities were back, that all of the problems that they had in the 80s and the early 90s were starting to get solved, and people were moving back to the cities, and people were doing business in cities, and new restaurants were popping up right and left, and bars and nightlife, and in many cases the professional sports teams were moving back to the cities. That's where all the action was. The population was moving from the suburbs to the cities because that's where everything interesting was going on. And it seems like now, and it doesn't even matter which big city you're talking about, the big cities here in California or around the country, they're all dealing with the same problems, whether it's budgets that are upside down or crime or homelessness. Why do you think it is that things seem to work back then and they're not working right now?
Well, I think it's because the people who were running big cities and trying to run big cities all had some form of experience at dealing with problems in a confrontational way. They were not burdened with all these alleged conversations about what's best. They kind of knew what was best. Daley knew how to run Chicago. He knew how to navigate Chicago. He knew exactly what he needed to get done. Dick Reardon knew Los Angeles without a doubt. He knew exactly how to merge all those little towns that make up Los Angeles County, even though he was only the city mayor. He treated it as if he ran the whole place. And Giuliani, of course, elevated himself by running New York and the boroughs therein in such a way that he was even programmed to possibly run for the presidency of the United States. So you had a collection of people. They all had one thing in common. They had experience, they had been executives, and they were prepared not to be dictated to by sponsors and supporters.
It seems like it's almost comparable to that old-timey crowd in Hollywood, the big stars back in the old days, when they didn't just wake up one day and some machine tried to make them a lead in a movie. They started out in vaudeville. They started out in radio. They did everything in the business that you could do, and by the time you put them on the big screen, they'd seen just about anything you can throw at them, and they were ready for it. It seemed like with you guys, you kind of went through the same process, where by the time you became mayor, there wasn't anything that was going to hit you that you hadn't seen.
No, as a matter of fact, not only that, I had access, as I'm sure Giuliani had access, to so many people around the world that would be responsive if there was an evidence of need for the city of New York or the city of San Francisco or the city of Los Angeles or Chicago. That was really the way it was. And it was because there were equitable relationships existing between people over an extended period of time without reference to whether or not they were Republicans or Democrats.
One of the hot issues in the 1990s when you were Speaker was term limits. Voters in California passed term limits for members of the state assembly, the state senate, the statewide constitutional officers. Many cities and counties did the same thing. Right now, we just experienced fires here in Los Angeles. We've experienced fires in Paradise in Northern California before that. And when I would talk to people in Sacramento about our water policy and our fire mitigation policy and all of the issues that touch fires, they all pretty much said the same thing. That's one of those issues that suffers when you have voter-imposed term limits that people don't think about when they vote for term limits. Because it's not like you wake up one day and you're an expert about water policy or fire policy. You learn that over a long period of time. And when I'm sure you were in the legislature, there were people in your caucus, in your house that you regarded as being experts on those subjects. And many of you leaned on them for information and expertise and guidance and those sorts of things. Well, if those people term out of office, then you don't have those people around, and you're also not inclined to think in terms of the long term. You think about what will help you get elected to the next office. So issues that are long-term issues kind of get pushed to the side. Your thoughts?
Well, your accurate description of who, where, when, and why it was holding public office in that time period and maintaining public office and got run out under term limits. There were individuals who could have been elected and reelected consistently based upon their performance. And to the extent that they did perform, they were able to do everything they needed to do to work those relationships for the benefit of the city that they represented. And it was the way the world turned, frankly, when the voters, and many times voters do things that are inconsistent with quality, when they decided they could terminate people whom they could not otherwise get rid of under some rule called you can only do this twice or you can only do it 3 times. Can you imagine if you had a heart attack and you were looking for the best heart person, would you be looking for somebody who was trying it for the first time? That's what the voters did to themselves when they said term limits shall be imposed. They eliminated all of the best brains, in many cases, on the issues, but also they eliminated the brain that had the contact to the best brain. And all of that they now suffer from. And then if they add to that concept of what's called ranked choice voting, You put ranked choice voting and term limits together, and it is a combination of ultimate disaster. There should not be any limitations on how long you hold public office, except you can't get the voters to give you the job again.
Do you think there's any way for us to reform these cities without getting rid of ranked choice voting and term limits?
I think it will be almost impossible to save the cities as long as there is the kind of people who are the end result of ranked choice voting and term limits.
We're speaking with former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Mr. Mayor, all the books right now from the last presidential election are being written, and many of them are being tough on not just former President Biden, but the people around him, because the books are saying that his cognitive decline was more dramatic than they were willing to admit to publicly, and they had to manage him, and they had to try to mitigate that in many ways. The presidency, obviously, is a unique position that's just not comparable to just about anything else, but that wouldn't be the first time that has happened before in politics. I would imagine back when you were Speaker of the Assembly, pre-term limits, you had people in the Assembly, you had people in the legislature who you would regard as being cognitively in decline. As someone who had to make that institution work, and you had to get to 41 votes to get anything through, and if a member was not all there mentally but was duly elected by their constituents, their vote counted just as much as everyone else. If you had someone in that state in the Assembly and you had to work with them and you needed their vote, how would you manage that?
Well, you would literally talk to that person. At least that's what I did. Whenever there was any member that had an issue, whether they were going to vote for me or not, I did my best to help that member address that issue appropriately. And I literally had an ongoing working relationship with the press world to make sure they would not make light of the fact that somebody had a particular problem. And believe me, it worked very well. And it will work again if the leadership would simply step up to the plate and collectively attack the issue of, one, term limits, and two, changing the method of how you can vote. Voting ought to be the way it was for George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Dwight Eisenhower. It should not have been altered one iota beyond that. And believe me, to the extent that that reality visits itself upon us, we will get us back to quality selection, election process.
Coming up in 2026, California is going to have an open seat for governor. And Kamala Harris, the former vice president, has not announced if she's going to run for that seat. She said she's going to take until the end of summer and then decide. Do you think she ultimately jumps in?
I would assume that at the moment she has probably nothing left to do in her own way. And believe me, I got in trouble with her because I recommended, when I understood that she was being considered as the nominee for the vice presidency, I recommended and said in quite direct way, make sure you understand that your talent is probably more on the attorney general side than it is on the side of the people who like to run the whole operation. And if I were you, I would tell them that maybe I'm flattered that I could be the VP. And I know I'd be the first woman of color, woman without South Asian accents and connections, but I would rather be the attorney general. Had that happened, she'd still be a viable player in the whole operation. She became the person to follow Biden. And when Biden didn't keep his word, when he got the presidency, he said he was only going to do one term. The day after he said that, he should have been continuously focused on trying to make sure that quality would have replaced himself we never would have paid any attention to his decline in process based on age. Believe me, he was a fabulous guy elected before he was able even to be sworn in to the U.S. Senate. He was extraordinarily talented. But under the circumstances, at some point, we began to, in fact, lose some of what we had. And had he done that, and had she proceeded by way of the AG process, she may very well have ended up on the Supreme Court, or she may have been a quality candidate by virtue of learning everything you need to know to be a very good U.S. Senator. And she was on her way. I just hope that she does not ignore the need this time around to get the job, but only on the basis that she is able to select the people who will help her run the country. She didn't get that option when she was the vice president. She had to accept the people who were more interested in protecting Biden than in protecting the country.
So wait, so you think she's going to run for president and not governor?
I think that she is thinking that it may get her the opportunity to legitimately run for president.
Now, if she gets in, she will be a heavy, heavy, heavy favorite. All the polls have indicated that. She'll have double-digit leads. Some polls have her over 50%. The other Democrats who have declared their candidacies for governor are now saying, and this includes Katie Porter, Antonio Villaraigosa, Eleni Kounalakis, Javier Becerra, they don't care if she gets in or not. They're not dropping out of the race. I can't imagine that's true, but that's what they're saying.
If properly managed, she will defeat each and every one of them. The problem, though, we have in the state of California, just if you were viewing from the Republicans do not now have a candidate. If the former governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, decided to run, the numbers of which you speak would change overnight. The polls would show his candidacy as being potentially more formidable than anybody else's candidacy, period. If there isn't somebody of his quality for election purposes by the Republicans isn't in that race, all the other people might as well get out now. She wins.
Former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. Mr. Mayor, I think you should host a podcast. I think we'd all be listening, and I think both of those advertisers and more would be buying time.
Call me at any time. I love talking as you gather.
All right. We'll be calling you back. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for stopping by.
All right, bye now.
Well, one of the big immigration stories that is being covered right now involves a horrible crime that was committed right here in Orange County by an illegal alien who is now being set to be released from prison after just serving for a short period of time.
And there's a whole lot of finger pointing going on to exactly whose fault this is. Is it Gavin's fault? Is it the Orange County District Attorney's Office? Is it a judge? There's a lot of finger pointing going on.
Let's have more on this from the Fox News Channel.
Here's Alex Michelson introducing Bill Maloogian.
Seems like everyone in California is pointing fingers in someone else's direction tonight after a bombshell report from Fox's Bill Maloogian. He revealed that a twice-deported undocumented migrant and convicted double murderer will serve just 3.5 years out of a 10-year sentence after an uproar. California governor.
How does that happen?
Okay, you want to hear something that'll make your head just pop off your body? It's my understanding, on very good authority, that he didn't even go into the general prison. They put him in a medical facility where he spent his entire time.
Why?
Because he was in a car accident, don't you know?
California Governor Gavin Newsom agreed to release the man into ICE custody when his sentence is up and accused the Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer of cutting a deal with the murderer in the first place.
Wait, that doesn't sound like Todd Spitzer.
No. No. That is not what happened. It was a deal between the defense attorney and the judge. And the judge in question, who is now retired, was known for giving lenient sentences to criminals.
Spitzer says Orange County prosecutors argued for the maximum sentence, but the judge disagreed.
And this is a problem that we're seeing all throughout California. There is so much good work happening right now in San Francisco with Brooke Jenkins as district attorney, but she gets hampered left and right by the judges in San Francisco who think all the drug dealers from Honduras are victims of human trafficking, and so they let them out.
Well, and what I'm hearing now from friends in various DA's offices all throughout the state of California is that now that Prop 36 passed, they're filing charges against people right and left. And the court system is over capacity, and the judges are furious with the prosecutors for bringing so many charges against people, and they're lashing out. The judges are a huge problem right now.
Here's Fox's Bill Malugin with his interviews.
It was November 2021, a fiery collision on an Orange County freeway. A young couple dead, and the driver who crashed into them, a twice-deported illegal alien from Mexico with multiple felonies, in custody for being drunk, high, and speeding at nearly 100 miles per hour.
I got a knock on the door, and there's two police officers.
The pain written all over the face of Pavel Osokin, as he recalls being told his son Nikolai and his 19-year-old girlfriend Anya Varfolomeev, friends since they were kids, were gone.
They told me there was a horrible incident. My son and his girlfriend Anya basically were burned alive in their car. She was my daughter.
Anya's father, Anatoly, got a similar knock on the door that night.
He said Anya's name. I said, yes, it's my daughter. My wife came downstairs and she was screaming and crying. She said, no.
In spring of 2022, Oscar Eduardo Ortega Anguiano was convicted on two.
He's so bad he has 4 names?
Yeah. Well, once you go beyond 3, I'm suspicious.
In spring of 2022, Oscar Eduardo Ortega Anguiano was convicted on 2 counts of gross vehicular manslaughter while intoxicated. A judge sentenced him to 10 years. But on Easter Sunday, the family say they received this notice from the California Department of Corrections that on July 19th, he'll be getting out.
That's not 10 years.
This is what happens so often here in the state of California, where some portion of the criminal justice apparatus breaks down. You just can't have a good DA. You just can't have a good police department. You just can't have a good jury pool. You also need to have good judges. You need to have good parole boards. You need to have good governors appointing people to all of these positions. And if you have one break in the chain, it all falls apart.
2 years for killing 2 kids. It's confusing to me. Why you give them 10 if they're going to spend 5 and then 3?
But following...
It's not like this was even a first-time offense. This guy's got one hell of a record.
Yeah, no kidding. In addition to being in the country illegally.
But following our reporting earlier today, the U.S. Attorney in Los Angeles announced his office filed federal charges against Ortega Anguiano for felony reentry, and he'll face up to 20 years in prison.
There you go. That is Bill Asaley kicking ass already.
Well, what's so great about having Bill Asaley as the U.S. Attorney is it's almost as if the DAs and the parole boards and the judges and the Attorney General here in California, who are in many cases out to lunch, they now have adult supervision. They now have someone who's watching what they're doing. And if they do something like this, he'll find a federal angle to go make the situation right. And that's exactly what he's doing here.
And when you bring federal charges, you can't play the games that we play in the state of California, where you only serve less than half your sentence or a third of your sentence. You have to serve 85% of a federal sentence before you even get considered for any kind of parole.
And then the governor can't issue you a pardon. A California parole board can't release you. None of that is at play when you're dealing with the federal system.
with the White House promising to pursue the case.
President Trump is not going to tolerate illegal immigrant crime.
That was Bill Maloogian reporting. And after his story first aired, Governor Newsom's office issued this response to Bill's tweet saying, quote, after being deported in 2013, the individual unlawfully re-entered the U.S. and committed heinous crimes. A GOP DA then gave him a plea deal instead of pursuing second-degree murder.
That's not true.
Nope.
CDC.
Also, how chicken-ass is Gavin that he's going to make that accusation but won't even name Todd Spitzer?
No, he won't. Or how about the deputy district attorney who was in the courtroom who knows that's exactly what did not happen?
CDCR will again coordinate with ICE as they have with 10,000 plus inmates to transfer him before release. So here is that GOP DA. He's talking about Todd Spitzer from Orange County. Quote, this was not a plea deal. This was a defendant who pled to the court and was sentenced by a judge under California law over the objection of Orange County prosecutors who unsuccessfully argued for the maximum sentence. Spitzer goes on to accuse California legislators of being soft on criminals.
Why would Gavin Newsom try to throw the Orange County District Attorney's Office under the bus on this story when it was so obviously the judges?
Well, my guess is, and you notice who the tweet came from. The tweet was not from Gavin's personal account. It was from his press office account. And the guy that runs his press office is real bitchy and likes to fight with people on social media all the time, including, I believe, Jennifer Van Laar, who's a guest on this program all the time, friend of the show. And my guess is he saw things on social media, on Twitter, that he didn't like. And so he saw that it was the Orange County District Attorney and that office that brought the charges against the guy. So it must have been one of their prosecutors that reached a deal with the defense when that did not happen. This was a deal between the defense and the judge. The DA was cut out of it. But Gavin is blaming the DA because if it's the judge and the defendant that made the deal, that it's the system that did it. And he feels like he's going to get the blame if it's the system that screwed up. But that's exactly what happened. The claim that Gavin Newsom is making is provably false. Let's see if the newspapers do a fact check on this one. Let's see if they hold him accountable for what he's claiming in statements that he's putting out on social media. I doubt they will, but what he said is not true, and it's provably not true. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, we got an email about that awful vehicular manslaughter case. This is from someone who wants to remain anonymous. The policy of the California Department of Corrections and California law have classified gross vehicular manslaughter as a non-violent crime. CDCR policy states that any convicted felon will receive an automatic 50% sentence reduction and is eligible for an unbelievable amount of time cuts, which would lead to an inmate getting parole so early.
Well, everything associated with this case is disgusting.
You murdered two people with a car because you were drunk and high and going 100 miles an hour, and California classifies that as non-violent.
If you're driving 100 miles an hour, high or drunk or not, that's reckless. What freeway were we talking about here? Was it the 405 or the 22?
I'm surprised you can go 100 miles an hour on either of those freeways.
I grew up real close to there, and I'm surprised you can go more than 20 miles an hour on that freeway. But the speed limit's 65 miles an hour on both of those freeways. So if you're going 100 miles an hour, you're going 35 miles an hour over the posted speed limit. Anything 30 plus over the speed limit is reckless driving. So you know you're being unbelievably reckless by doing that on a freeway, particularly freeways that are loaded with cars.
And the California Department of Corrections want to do everything they could to get him out back on the roads as soon as possible.
All right. We'll have more on that tomorrow. Maybe even check in with the victims' family members. We've been chatting with them, and I think they're going to come on either tomorrow or Monday. So we'll let you know when we have them booked. But first, Randy, there is more public corruption going on in California.
This is a case of attempted corruption in one of the most crass ways possible. But a crooked developer, a father and son, tried to pass a city councilman in the city of Antioch in the East Bay a Yeti mug full of cash so they would advance their development. That city councilman called the FBI.
Good for him.
For more, here is ABC 7 in the Bay Area.
We begin this afternoon with a Yeti mug full of cash.
You don't hear that often on the news.
We begin this afternoon with a Yeti mug full of cash, an attempt to bribe an East Bay elected official. This one turned the tables and turned FBI informant.
ABC 7 News reporter Ansar Hassan has details from Antioch.
This red coffee mug was filled with thousands in cash, according to prosecutors, in an attempt to bribe an Antioch City Council member to help move along a stalled housing project.
Why would they offer a bribe when they already had, I'm assuming, like so many projects in the pipeline, because they seem to be a big developer?
Well, for certain developers, that's just how the game is played. It's how it was played in downtown Los Angeles for nearly a decade under Jose Huizar. If you didn't give him a bribe or take him to Vegas, your project was not going through.
And what's funny is these are just the ones who are overtly criminals. What happens most of the time is they do it legally, where you write the check to their campaign account or you write the check to a group that's supporting their campaign, and the money gets back to them, but not directly through them.
At the center of the controversy is the Aviano housing development. The FBI indictment alleges that last year, property developers David Sanson and his son Trent with De Nova Homes in Concord tried to bribe a city council member with $15,000 in cash. The council member reported it to the FBI. The council member hasn't been...
How do you fit $15,000 in a Yeti?
I don't know. How do you fit 12 ounces of coffee in one?
The council member hasn't been named. Antioch City Council member Tamisha Torres-Walker says she's glad they refused payment.
I think what shocked people was that the elected official who was offered the bribe reported the developer.
According to the indictment, the company didn't complete all of its required public infrastructure improvements, and that a video recording of one of the encounters allegedly shows the son asking the city council member to place the issue on the city council agenda and vote in favor of moving it forward so they could get paid.
This is why there needs to be so much more oversight in everything local government does. While this city councilman is a stand-up guy and he did the right thing, more often than not, what we see is what happens in Oakland or now San Leandro.
Well, imagine being the council member where you're trying to play it straight and they come in and they offer you a mug full of cash. What would you do if it was offered to you?
I'd play Fink.
It's a little scary to see like what may be happening to our city in the background, especially coming out of the text message scandal. It kind of leaves you wondering if this is the first time it's happened.
Longtime community activist Frank Sterling Jr. and others are calling for more transparency on future projects.
So that we know what's going on. We know who's coming in, who's developers, how many places are they developing, what was their track record.
In a statement to ABC 7 News, De Nova Homes acknowledged the investigation, adding that David Sanson, quote, semi-retired in 2020, and he's no longer involved in the leadership or daily operations.
Well, of course you have to say that. He was bribing people.
I think if it were me, I would say no to the bribe, but I don't know if I'd go to the feds. I would just let them know that I don't do business like that.
Sanson's attorney says, we are confident that the facts will show Dave is innocent. Torres-Walker is not calling to terminate contracts with De Nova Homes, but is meeting with the city manager to investigate further.
No, I think at that point you definitely terminate the contract because that's a crooked developer.
Yeah, no kidding.
Get a deep dive into how many projects were actually brought to the council through De Nova Homes. What were the votes on those projects?
If convicted, the pair faces 15 years in prison. They'll be back in court in June.
And that's federal prison, so they got to serve all of that.
Oh, yeah. They'll serve more time than the guy that killed those two people.
In Antioch, Ansar Hassan, ABC 7 News.
So there you go. This time, an attempted case of bribery in the East Bay. But there is a lot of corruption in the state of California, in these local governments. And thank goodness the FBI is looking because there's a lot to find.
Well, you look at the news today, and that's all that's in the paper. And this is just what we know about. Imagine what they're going to find when they start digging into all that homeless money.
When you follow the money, you don't know where it goes. That's a quote from The Wire.